big data the end of privacy? No, but privacy has always changed. Really, first, there's never been privacy. It's always been the end of privacy. We've always had to reinterpret it for our needs of that given moment. When we lived in very small communities, there was actually less privacy than there is in cities, right? We now can be measured when we go online everywhere, but that inherently is not a problem because typically it's simply aggregated, and the harm, if there's a harm, is an advertisement that's more relevant to us. Doesn't seem like that much of a harm to me. I recognize that there are serious issues around privacy. I think that we're far in big data, but I think we're still far from the realization of those harms, and I think that we're a wise enough society that we're going to strike the right balance to prevent the true harms from cropping up versus what I'll call these pseudo harms. A pseudo harm is my image is captured by a CCTV on the street, and I feel like that has been a problem. Every taxi now has a CCTV, so I can be monitored, and I feel like there's a dignity, shedding some of my dignity to always be monitored. I don't like that. I think there's some validity to that. On the other hand, the harm there is if the police function of the state arrests me because they presume I'm of one origin or another, right? That's a real problem. I think that if the camera also has a secondary use and wants to know if I'm a male or female, so it can then give me an advertisement, whether for a flower service or for a race car driving test, it is a lower level harm for me. I recognize that it's an issue, but I don't think it's a big issue. And I'm nervous that the true harm of privacy, of it being truly abused in a very despicable way, clouds out these more innocuous uses of the data. We have to remember the 20th century was blood-soaked with the way that data abetted ugly ends, right? The tattoo on the arms of Nazi concentration camp prisoners, were numbers that corresponded to the Hollerith machine that was used to abet the final solution. America violated the privacy, and on a very different scale, America violated the privacy of Japanese Americans from the census data to round them up into internment camps. Now, very different scale, but it's simply to say that there are very serious harms on how data can be misused. Let us prevent the serious harms, and for these other ways with which we can unlock incredibly new avenues of human thought and human betterment, such as by collecting medical data, processing it to know what works when under what condition, what sort of drugs are most effective with what sort of genotype. By aggregating data, collecting it, and analyzing it, I think we should absolutely let that go forward because it's so far from the real harms of privacy. The regulatory aspects of big data are going to be extremely important, and how we work them out is a great unknown. But what we can say is that it would be wrong to try to predict how the technology will evolve. The best that regulators should do is to understand their role is to create a setting, is to create the environment for technology to flourish, but knowing that they stand as a backstop to adhere and to protect the public interest. But to predict what's going to happen and act in advance of technology evolving, I think is lunacy. What you really want is the experimentation and the natural experimentation of industry to take this valuable new tool, learn from it, and do great things. And where you then see a harm and a problem, to regulate that. Because if not, it's presuming that a regulator has a crystal ball and can predict the future. And no one can. So a big question right now is, do you own your data? Does the individual own his or her data? Should she be able to enter into a market transaction and sell it? And a cynic will say, well, you already do that. So for example, you might not think that you own your data when you go into Google, or that you get any economic compensation when you go to Google. But the fact is, you were able to do a lookup for information and get an answer in 0.6 of a second for free. Well, there was a data element to this. There was a data aspect. In fact, Google knew something about you and can give you an advertisement. They earned money if you clicked on that ad. There's also the aspect that Google was able to improve its service by having more people clicking on certain things and not other things to learn from where people click and what interests them. So there was a market transaction, it just wasn't very transparent. When you go to a supermarket with your loyalty card and you get a discount, the reason why is that they're learning from you about what people, not you specifically, but an aggregation of people like to buy and what they don't buy in combination so that they can better target and tailor their advertising and their promotions, right? There was a market aspect to it, and you benefited by having a discount. So we're already in the world in which people do enter into a market transaction with their data. How about if we were to just jack that up on steroids? If we said, okay, you have a property right on your data, and you should be able to do with it what you will. It's a very seductive idea, and I'm not opposed to it. I mean, I work for a place called The Economist, and we tend to like markets, so I embrace this sort of market approach. A market could be like democracy, a market for competition of power, a market could be for data, and we could give it a property right, and we could say that, let's see what happens, and if we can fuel a social good from the self-interest. Sure, that's fine. The problem with that, though, is that we are in a world in which more and more we're trying to get rid of intellectual property. We have the open source movement for software development. We have Wikipedia, which is an open source content approach, and Creative Commons for the production of intellectual information. And we've seen the huge problems of patents in high technology, in which companies are bludgeoned for a small little patent that doesn't look like it was a great invention. Do we really want to go down the route of giving every single person a property right on every piece of data associated with themselves? I think it's really thorny. I think it's difficult. It's not to say that it's wrong, and it's not to say in certain contexts it wouldn't be the right answer. In fact, I think it is, because I think markets are great. And if we lower the transaction costs of markets, we could imagine that people enter into a market transaction all the time with their data in new ways that unlock lots of new forms of value for all parties. Great. But I'm really resistant to the idea that, that the individual owns every aspect of their data all the time. I think that's a very thorny proposition, and the issue is just, not that it's wrong, but the issue is just not yet ripe enough to know if that's the way we should go down. I think it's amazing that advertising is one of the pioneering industries that is driving big data forward. The reason why is that as advertising shifts, or as the content shifts to a digital setting, suddenly we are able to measure things that we couldn't measure before. Now you might say, well, healthcare is in a digital setting too. Yeah, but the problem is there's so many rules on the use of that data for privacy reasons that we can't actually benefit from it. We can't reuse it and unlock the value from it. In the advertising world, it is a nice area where we can experiment and learn. So I think first it's going to improve advertising. That's the most important thing. The famous adage in which half my advertising is wasted, I don't know what half. Now we actually can see what works and what doesn't. So the ad is more relevant to the consumer, the ad is more relevant to the advertiser who's putting it before us. That's a great win. We are far from perfect as an industry, but no problem, we're getting there. That's a great win. But more interestingly is the fact that the techniques that happen in advertising are going to spread into healthcare, are going to spread into education, are going to spread into lots of other domains to improve society. So I'm extremely bullish on the fact that so much great thinking and great minds are put around advertising. And at the end of the day as well, we're consumers and we need to buy things, and it's good to have more relevant information rather than less relevant information.